Okay, moving on from storytelling to marketing automation. There's a trending reluctance. I'll bring your phone down as well, Mark. I think it's up here. So there's a trending reluctance for marketing managers to embrace automation in its entirety. Well, startups and small businesses have quite adopted this new automation practice. Larger organizations struggle in endorsing new technologies. There's also a widespread lack of awareness of marketing automation products, which can create an exponential difference to businesses of all sizes. This particular masterclass coming up now, folks, uncovers how marketing tools have evolved over the last decade, which are emerging technologies you need to be aware of, and the systems you can implement right now, today, to not get left behind. Please welcome the CEO of Station 5, Lambros Photios.
How are we doing? Yes, I get a response. I like it. It's good. All right, I'm going to be really painful. I'm going to be that guy. Can everyone stand up? Because we've all been sitting down for an hour listening, get the blood pumping, and we can all sit back down. That's all I wanted you to do. I'm done now. I'll just get off stage because I'm that annoying guy. Cool. So I'm here to talk about marketing automation, and I'm going to walk around a bit, and unlike Mark, I don't trust myself with my foot-eye coordination, so I'm going to move these back a little bit, otherwise I'm going to be playing dodgem cards for the next hour, which is more exciting for you guys than it is for me. So I'm here to talk about marketing automation, and as Tony said, I think there's a heavy reluctance, particularly for larger organizations, to adopt automation. I find that a lot of startups are doing it because they're highly maneuverable, because they're smaller and they can be, and it's the excuse I hear from larger organizations all the time that we're too big, we can't just start using a new piece of software. So one of the big things I'm going to talk to you guys about today is actually the approach that you can use within a larger organization if you do want to start leveraging these new tools. But first, I'll talk a bit about me, because I don't think we know who I am. So my name's Lambros. I'm the CEO of a business called Station 5. I started Station 5 about 4 years ago. My experience in the world of marketing, if you'd call it that, started at the age of 19. I was in a university lecture theatre, and effectively what happened was I was studying a double degree, which I think a lot of us just kind of do because it's the hip thing to do nowadays. And I got incredibly bored with uni. And what I started to do is I started to build web applications, which are kind of, if you think of things like WordPress and Drupal, that was pretty much like my niche. Drupal wasn't something that many programmers did back then in Australia, and so it was something that I really specialized in. And I started building out these web applications whilst at uni at the age of 19, in the lectures instead of paying attention, which is, I think, what most of us were doing in uni. And I think it was about a year later at the age of 20 when I found I was leading up a major digital transformation for Bupa Australia, which was to migrate effectively all of the individuals who were using one of their programs that was greater than 20 years old into one of their more modern programs. So it was a major digital transformation. Off the tail end of that, since then, obviously started Station 5 several years later. And what kind of progressed was doing work with other insurance companies like IAG, then working with government. So Queensland Government is one of the larger organisations that we work with on the government side, and working with local councils as well. Having worked also with ANZ Bank quite a bit, AMP Capital, and others. And I would probably say some of the funnest work I've done though is definitely with the startups. And so but I don't want to isolate kind of one group today. My kind of intent in the approach today is to, approach both how startups should be taking on automation, but then also how can we apply some of those same learnings to larger organizations in how we've done things there. One other thing, I do need to do a bit of self-promotion, which is not really self-promotion. It's during the lunch break across the hall down at the other end, We're doing a podcast which is streaming from 12 p.m. through till the end of the day. We're then going to be back here again doing it. Our intent is to get people like Mark, if he'll give us an hour of his time, to come and talk on the podcast. That's going to be live streaming online as well, but there's about 3 rows of chairs there, and I'd love for you guys to come and check it out. Cool. So what is a bit of an outline of what we're doing today? We're going to start by defining automation. The biggest part of what I'm going to talk to is where you should be starting. Yeah. We'll talk about automation in action. We'll go through some practical examples just to kind of fuel some inspiration. We'll then go into emerging technologies, which I think everyone wants to use but doesn't really know where to start with them. We'll then cover off some lessons learned, and then my favorite part is actually the Q&A, so I'm going to try and leave about 10-15 minutes for that, because I know that everyone's got a different situation. I know that we can only talk so much about what scenario we're in, but anything you can share that gives us some understanding of where you're at will definitely help me to make sure that I can give you some feedback. This definitely separates the room. The purpose of Trump is not to make it so that approximately 50% of the US hates me as soon as I get up on stage. It's actually because, in my opinion, one of the most effective data-driven / automation campaigns of all time was the election. So I definitely covered myself there before we move on. But the main thing I want to do is a straw poll. A straw poll. Is everyone familiar with what a straw poll is? No? So a straw poll is pretty much, I'm going to call out a bunch of groups. We're going to hold up our hands if we fall into that group, and it's really just to give me a bit of an understanding of who we've got in the room. Cool? Sweet. So let's start with startups. We'll work our way up. So who here is a startup or works for a startup or owns a startup? Yeah. Cool. In-house marketing. So, okay, I think that's our majority. Do we have any like freelance consultants or freelancers in general? A couple? Cool. Back to the previous group, so in-house marketing. I'm going to go through small, medium, and large business. Just tell me which one you fall into. I'll define them as well. So let's go small business, sub 50 staff. Yeah. Cool. Let's go 51 to 200 staff, medium business. Yeah, and 200 plus. Do you all work together? You three? Okay. But you still manage to cluster together somehow at the same table? Great. Cool. So let's start by defining automation. Automation is ultimately, as I've said there, a system that uses machines to do work instead of people, or the process of changing such a system. The second part is really vital for the larger organizations in the room, even for the medium-sized businesses, because generally the process of actually instigating that change is where the struggle is. Yeah? Automation, by definition, should be incredibly easy to do. Yeah, the whole intent is to separate yourself from the day-to-day of what needs to happen in the manual processes that are currently going on. And so what we really need to make sure of here is that we understand what we need to do to actually start to make these changes. Cool. I'm going to go through some statistics here, some of my old-time favorites. So 69% of companies, or marketing executives, I should say, claim to use a marketing automation platform. Yeah? So generally, the vast majority of the people in this room would claim to use marketing automation. But that number drops off pretty quickly with the next statistic, which is that 15% are using AI. And everyone wants to be using emerging technologies because they think it gives them a leg up over other companies. Yeah? But for those who actually automate lead generation, generally within 6 to 9 months, they notice a 10% boost in revenue, which is, in my opinion, huge. Yeah? Who here thinks they use automation at the moment? Who here thinks they use marketing automation effectively? Nobody? Cool. Okay, that's fine. Let's try and turn that around. So the first thing I want to do before we get into some of the strategies that you can be using is just confront the elephant in the room. We see a tremendous number of stories in the media, if we follow the media, of organizations that are replacing people with automation. We all hear of stories like NAB and Telstra in the press where so many thousand people are being replaced with AI and automation in the next few years. I don't want you to think that using automation is replacing people. Yeah, we need to get past that mentality. The intent of automation should not be to replace your marketing team. If you manage a marketing team, your intent should be to augment people's efforts and make it so they can get more done with their time and be more effective. Yeah? Be better at hitting deadlines. Be better at achieving the outcomes that you need to, not about getting rid of people. Yeah? And I want that to be the philosophy that everyone has, because to be honest, I think it's a pretty daunting reality if your approach is going to be that we're just going to get rid of the whole marketing team because we can use some cool tools to automate processes. Yeah? Before we get started on this, I want to talk to a couple of stories. The first is the importance of just giving it a go. Yeah, of just taking that first step and starting to embark upon the process of using automation. The reason that it's so vital is I think that a lot of organizations fail when they over-engineer the process and they spend too much time thinking instead of actually doing and putting in place these steps for automation. Yep. So part of the podcast that I was telling you about before, I actually went and spoke to an individual called Fred Shabester. You may not know the name. I hope you know the company name. So Fred was he still is, the co-founder of Finder.com.au. Does everyone know Finder.com.au? Show of hands. Keep your hand up if you know the jingle. Keep your hand up if you want to sing the jingle. Cool, we lost everyone. Cool, so I was speaking to Fred, and one of the things that he said over and over again was that the philosophy and the business culture at Finder is to just get started, to just launch and to just give it a go, right? And to learn from that and to adapt very, very quickly. And one of the things we spoke to was that as a startup, that was very easy to do. And one of the misconceptions that people have is when the organization grew, spread over to the UK and to the US, set up their New York office and so on, that things became a lot harder to actually implement. Yeah? And that was my question, right? And to which he turned around and said, yeah, that's not the case at all. It's just about making sure that you start with a small bite-sized piece within a small department. Yeah? So don't start too big. Cool? So, where do we start? There's a 5-step process I like to use here. The first 3 are probably the most important. The last 2, everyone wants to do, and I encourage you not to. Yeah? But we will talk to them, because everyone likes emerging technologies. So the first thing is to start with data, particularly for the organizations who aren't startups. Startups, I'll come back to you. You guys actually have an advantage here. For the large organizations, you need to start with data. Am I majorly ignoring this side of the room? Yes. So we need to start with the data. What does that mean? Effectively, not near the speaker. What starting with the data effectively means is we need to start with what we've got in place at the moment. So what information we have access to about our customers. Yeah? Start with them. We talk about this mentality of bottom-up or top-down. Sorry, I'm going to jump between them quite a bit. Is anyone familiar with the concept of bottom-up or top-down? No? No? Cool. All right. So generally speaking, if you look at like an organizational chart, you think of top being your managers and bottom effectively being the employees. And depending on the size of the organization and the structures, that could be quite tall or quite small. When we speak about bottom up, generally we're saying start with the employees and what they do. When we talk about top down, we're speaking about process management. Yeah? So in the context of marketing, particularly marketing automation, when we talk about this approach of top down, the idea is changing the business process, yeah, and then making it so that all the systems that you use can now be framed around that business process. So for instance, if as an organization you want to implement HubSpot, yeah, and you've never used HubSpot before and you're a large organization, The whole mentality is you can start with the top of the organization, which would be, we want to use HubSpot, but before we do, we need to change this fundamental business process before we can implement HubSpot. Now, within a startup, that makes sense. You can frame the business around HubSpot. Things like automated emails and so on can all be structured around how HubSpot works. You can change the business process based on how HubSpot is set up. Yeah? And that is called top-down. The mentality of changing something that's non-technical to implement a technical system. Yeah? The reverse is bottom-up, and bottom-up is generally what larger organizations need to do. So if you put up your hand for 50 plus staff within your organization, which I think was the vast majority of people in here, the reality is that bottom-up is probably the approach you need to take. The reality is you're not going to change a fundamental business process so that you can adopt a new technology. And if you think that that's what's going to happen, it's not going to work. Yeah? And I'm not speaking from a statistic other than this is what I've seen across major organizations, multiple insurance companies, multiple banks, and government. It does not work to change a business process just so that you can start to use a new system. Yeah? Now, in small business or in startups, you can. So it actually becomes a lot easier because you can frame the business process around the technology that you want to use. Updating company documentation and onboarding 5 people onto a new piece of technology is not hard. And changing that process is not difficult at all. But if you're thinking about an organization where the marketing tools that you embed will ripple through the whole organization, it's not realistic to have this mentality of, yeah, I can make it so that people change their process of lead gen, I can get salespeople to use this different tool, and so on and so forth. It doesn't work. So you need to start micro. Yeah? Does that make sense to everyone in terms of approach? Just by show of hands, and this is more directed at those who said kind of 50 plus staff, so sorry to rule out small business and startups. It would be ruling out myself. Who here has tried the top-down approach as a large organization and gotten nowhere with it? As in tried to introduce new systems and haven't had much success because you've tried to change something big within the business? Couple? Who's too freaked out to even give it a go? Where's everyone else at? All right, so we're going to talk a lot about bottom-up today. Yeah, top-down, for those who are startup small business, I'm not abandoning you. It will naturally become very clear how easy it is to start to use these tools. And to be honest, some of the tools that I'm going to run through, you will be able to implement straight away. Yeah, so I'm not going to leave you guys behind. Current state of the industry and emerging technologies. Is anyone interested in giving a crack to emerging technologies and that sort of thing, like trying things like AI, trying things like blockchain? Like, is that something that tickles your fancy, or is it more like we just need to do some automation? No response? Okay. Some automation? Yeah. Keep your hand up if you want to be doing AI. Couple? Okay, cool. I'm going to ask why when we get to the Q&A to your table. Sweet. All right, so let's talk about some tools, yeah? And then we're going to talk about how you would actually start to implement these. And some are a lot easier to implement. The first one I always like to talk to is analytics, how you're accessing your data. Who's using an analytics tool at the moment? Yeah? Okay, cool. I would technically class analytics as automation, and I know a lot of the hands that went up there were people who said that they're not doing automation at the moment. I think it's the first step to automation. And the reason I think it's the first step, and the reason a lot of organizations do it, is because the barriers to entry for this are not large, right? Like, you just need access to data streams. So Google Analytics, show of hands. Yeah? Do you have any other tools that people want to shout out that they use? Honestly, anyone. MailChimp? Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, cool. Yeah, I would assume. Yeah. No, it's great. Cool. Is anyone experimenting with new tools? Yeah, a few. We're going to go through a few that you could be using just to kind of increase, I guess, the access to the data that you have. We're going to talk a bit about joining data sources and the benefit of doing that, because at the moment it's very manual. A lot of people do it with spreadsheets still. I don't get it. If you do it, that's cool. We're going to get past that today. It's not a big hurdle. Don't worry. The second thing I want to talk about, which is probably taking that next step, and this is where you do need to really start to think about business processes and who's impacted by change, is workflow automation. Yeah. So workflow automation generally works in, to explain workflow automation, if you don't understand it, it is automating processes, which is most of what today's about. Ultimately, it's about taking some sort of trigger, which could be a user registers on my website, yeah, and then having some sort of action that takes place as a result. So trigger action, trigger action, trigger action, yeah? Or you can have multiple actions that happen from a particular trigger, yeah? So it could be user fills out this form on my website, which links through to MailChimp, and as soon as you're added to MailChimp, we also add them to HubSpot. Basic implementation. There are much more intricate ones, but that's kind of the starting point. I'm sorry to keep doing this. Try using the other arm if it's getting painful. Show of hands, who's doing some automation? And the reason I'm doing this is just so I know where to kind of focus my attention over the next kind of 20 minutes or so before we get to the Q&A. CRMs, tremendously large number of CRMs out there, everything from Pipedrive to Salesforce to HubSpot. I'm going to ask this because I've seen a lot of issues around this. Who's using Salesforce? Yeah. HubSpot? Pipedrive? And everyone something else. Cool, cool, cool. And other. There are things like pricing automation tools that are amazing, right? That actually make it so that marketing departments can now talk to product teams and help them to price products. Yeah? Like the fact that now, because I mean, like the reality is when you look at what an organization is doing, if you look at a values-based model, if you look at like what Mark was talking about earlier in having that story-driven approach, ultimately, we see that marketing is having a huge impact on other departments. Yeah, so things like pricing are based on what the value of a product is to someone, instead of we need to have at least a 30% profit margin on this product, is an approach that a lot of organizations are starting to adopt. There are obviously tools out there for content marketing, influencer marketing, and so on. I don't want to get too much into this, but please pull me aside afterwards if you want me to get you a list of tools on anything. I'm always happy to do that, and I'm here all day. So the first one is analytics. Everyone said, well, most people said Google Analytics, which is just mobile and web analytics usage. It's probably the entry point into analytics, the easiest to install. You can generally have it up and running on your website within minutes. Hotjar is one that everyone knows or seems to know, but don't seem to leverage to the fullest of their ability. Hotjar ultimately heat maps, scrolling maps, recordings of page interaction. What does that mean? So generally when you go to a website and you're looking at, say, Google, when someone comes to your website, and you're looking at Google Analytics, what we see is which pages they spent the most time on, what their bounce rate was, how they jumped between different pages if they did hang around. And then when we get really intricate, we set up things like events and e-commerce features within Google Analytics to see how people converted, if they converted, right? And then we can use that to then derive certain statistics. But the problem is that there are certain statistics like bounce rate that we don't quite understand, right? We don't know why people bounced off a particular page, particularly if we're driving a lot of traffic there. Why did someone see my Facebook ad, end up on my website, on my landing page, but then we had a 90% bounce rate and no one was filling out the form? Or we only got a 0.5% conversion rate. How do we turn that 0.5 conversion rate into 1 or 2%? So what Hotjar does is, it's practically Big Brother, but like you want it, is when someone comes to your page, it records how far down the page they scroll, yeah? If they're on a desktop, it records where their mouse moves on that page. If they're on a mobile phone, it records where their finger touches that screen, yeah? So within a very short space of time, you can see how someone actually interacted with the page. You can see how far down they made it. You can see that 90% of people didn't make it beyond the fold. So what does that tell you? And it's the learnings that you get from this that add a lot of value. And just like Google Analytics, it is something that can be set up within minutes, not hours. It's the same sort of concept. You put an embed code on the website, and then happy days, everything falls into place. Cool? So if you're using Google Analytics, in my opinion, you've got no excuse to not be using Hotjar. Yeah? There are alternatives to Hotjar as well. Yeah? So just pick the one that's right for you. And the last one is Sem Rush. I know there are a lot of SEO tools. This is just one of them that you should definitely check out. You don't need to install anything on your website. Yeah. And the reason that analytics, as you can see, the barriers to entry is so low is because the process of getting it all set up is so simple. Yeah. I did jot down one more, which I always forget the name of, and it's a Google tool, so I should remember it. So I do want everyone to check out a tool called Google Data Studio. I don't have a referral link, I'm sorry. It's free though, so that wouldn't be much value to me. So Google Data Studio is a tool where you can actually link together data sets. So this is what I was alluding to before when I said each of these systems like MailChimp or Google Analytics or Hotjar or Sem Rush, the analytics they provide are immensely valuable, but it's when you start to link together the data sets from multiple different marketing tools that you get a really clear vision of what's happening. So that's called Google Data Studio. I'd encourage you to write it down. It just came out of beta or just went into public. You can now use it. You don't have to be invited specifically by Google to use it. What it means is that you can take a tool like Google Analytics, combine the data with information from Hotjar, then link it with MailChimp, and then link it with your CRM like HubSpot or Salesforce or Pipedrive or something else. And you can link together these data sets and then use that to get a clear vision of what's happening across the board. Is anyone still using Excel spreadsheets for this process? A few? No? Well, I see it, so that's just cool. I'm glad you guys aren't. But Google Data Studio is a great tool to kind of bridge that gap. The second system that I'm going to go through is workflows, and unfortunately we're not going to go through all four. I'm just going to go through the first two. Yeah? I expect the other two will come up a lot more in the questions and answers, so if you've got any questions, please jot them down, and then we'll play with that funky thing that gets thrown around the room, because I'm a child. Cool, so workflows. Back to kind of the definition of workflow automation, just to refresh your memory. Workflow automation is generally the process of taking some sort of a trigger, yeah, and then some sort of an action happening. We sometimes also use the synonym of events for actions, yeah. But the idea is there's some trigger that takes place and then some event or action that follows as a result of that. Yeah? Does that make sense to everyone? Cool. There are three tools. Zapier and Flow are really good for SMEs. I'm not saying they don't work for larger organizations. I'm going to talk a bit in a second about how you're going to start to implement these if you're in a larger business. So the reason that I'm quite fond of Zapier and Flow, and I will say I've used Zapier much more than Flow, so I'm a huge advocate for it, but I'm certainly not discouraging the use of Flow. Generally, the way that these systems work is that all you need is administrator or developer access to any of the tools that you're implementing with. So say MailChimp as an example has always been an easy system to integrate with. When you log into these systems, you will choose what you want to integrate with, say MailChimp, and then it'll take you through a step-by-step process on how to get Zapier integrated with, say, MailChimp. Yeah? Zapier and Flow are really good for SMEs, generally because, SMEs being small, medium enterprise, just because they make it incredibly easy to set up these workflows. Where these systems will sometimes fail is where you need extremely intricate workflows. We're talking about kind of breaking down audiences based on several different criteria. Yeah? So when you use that's where that kind of brings up MuleSoft. MuleSoft's the kind of enterprise and government-ready system. Yeah. So if you are 200 plus staff, generally those organizations could potentially have MuleSoft already embedded within the organization. I'm looking at that table. No, not so much. Not yet. Cool. All right. Let's talk a bit about the approach. So I find that workflow automation tools like this are generally quite difficult to put into action. A lot of companies, I guess, shy away from that whole kind of, as we spoke about, top-down versus bottom-up mentality, where marketing executives will want to use a tool or a system like Zapier or like MuleSoft, and the problem is that they need to get, say, board approval or executive approval or some form of internal approval that can, and I've seen this happen, take more than a year to do. And the reality is that in technology, after about 18 months, a lot of these systems have become outdated. Or there's a new shiny product that we should be using. Yeah? Is everyone familiar with that process? Yeah, cool, a few nods. So the approach needs to be to start really, really small with a really simple process that you are not changing. So the process needs to be that you start off with what is the internal system that's currently in place at the moment. Yeah? I'm sorry, I don't have the 1, 2, 3 listed out. I'm more of a talker. I blame the podcast. So the step one needs to be to look at the current systems that are in place within an organization right now. Step two is a mental thing that you need to acknowledge that you are not going to change that system. Yep. I cannot tell you the number of times I've had an executive turn around to me and say, I want to create the change within this business. And that's really great. But change doesn't happen by trying to do something big, by doing something huge that's going to change what everyone does on a day-to-day basis like that and expecting it's going to work. Yeah? You need to start really, really small. So you need to acknowledge that the first thing that you do is going to be something that is incredibly small. Yeah? And it's really great to have that grand vision, and I want you to have that grand vision because that's how you do drive change within an organization, but you need to start very, very small. Cool? So the second step is to acknowledge that the huge change is not just going to happen from the get-go. Cool? Is everyone happy with that so far? Step 3 is identifying what process it is within an organization that you are going to change. Think low-hanging fruit like anything, right? So you need to identify what is easy to automate. I'm speaking specifically about automation because I think most of you can probably get the analytics set up pretty easily. Yeah? So in the context of automation, which process is a low-hanging fruit that you will find easy to replace? Does everyone understand that? Yeah? Now, generally I like to do a bit of a cost-benefit analysis or like a really pseudo cost-benefit analysis to find what those low-hanging fruit are. So sidebar to step 3, ultimately what that process looks like is let's look through the list of current processes that we have within the organization. Let's identify the cost to the business of automating it. Cost is not necessarily a dollar figure. Cost is very often impact-driven, as in how much of people's time am I going to need to do this? The benefit is the outcome that it has to the business. So how big is that outcome? You may turn around and say, I can implement this particular automation process within a day, but the reality is if the outcome is not impactful, then it's not something that's really worth doing. Where your sweet spot is identifying the processes that will take weeks to automate, but will save people in the long run 10-15% of their time. That's when you're onto a winner. Yeah? And there aren't generally a lot of those. Yeah? Otherwise someone probably would have jumped on them by now. But that certainly doesn't say they don't exist. There will be a few, and that's where you want to start. So things that take weeks to implement, not months. Yeah? That make it so that people within your team can save 10-15% of their time. Does that make sense to everyone? And then step 4 is implement. Cool. How are we going for time? We need to get to Q&A fairly soon. I'm going to talk a bit about emerging technologies. I'm going to talk a bit about why you shouldn't use them, which is really ironic because I do a lot of talks on emerging technologies, in particular blockchain and AI. I'm going to talk a bit about why you shouldn't use emerging technologies too much. Can I just get that show of hands again on, and I won't call everyone out, just the people who are kind of 200 plus staff. I know it was mostly that table, but yeah. Cool, so I've got a few. The people who put up their hands there are the only people who should be using big data and machine learning. I'm just going to call that out from now. Yeah? The cost for a small business, a startup, a medium organization, and the people change to implement big data and machine learning is ridiculous, and people underestimate it. And people always say, I'm going to use Salesforce because they have the tools, and then 6 months later abandon Salesforce. We won't go down that story, it makes me sad. Let's start at the top, work our way down. Chatbots, very happy for you to use them. I'm very against them. That's a personal thing. I'm happy to talk through why afterwards. In short, chatbots are very effective if you want to automate the customer experience in the very early stages of the customer experience. So for instance, someone comes to your website, they're a bit confused about how to go through a checkout process or about your products and they want more information. The whole idea is that a chatbot could replace, say, 9 out of 10 of the inquiries so that you don't need to do them. There are tools like Intercom, if you want to check them out, that do this. There are other tools like Zendesk that do this incredibly well. And the whole premise, and this, we all know the Facebook one, right? Facebook Messenger does this as well. So the whole idea here is that you can guide someone through a step-by-step sequence to get the answers that they want. You can use this technology if you're interested. The reason I say generally don't, and this is a personal opinion, and please form your own opinion about this, is I'm very much against chatbots because it replaces a personal interaction with your brand. Yeah? Everyone, you can all form your own, I guess, perspective around what sort of interaction you want to have with your customers. My personal viewpoint is chatbots remove that and make it so that a system is speaking to your customers instead of you. And I find that that's not really a way to represent the companies, at least that I work with. It's a personal thing. Cool? The second is virtual reality and augmented reality. I tend to class these together even though they're somewhat different. For those who don't know, virtual reality, the lady with the goggles here. Yeah. Augmented reality is Pokemon Go. It's the example that people seem to know. Cool? So, what is augmented reality? Augmented reality is kind of holding up your phone and what's happening through the camera lens changing what's on the screen versus what's there. So for instance, you may be walking through Harvey Norman, and if Harvey Norman had an augmented reality app set up, the whole idea should be that if you hold up your phone to, say, a TV monitor, you may get more information on that TV. On the phone. Yeah? And that whole process is called augmented reality. I'm very fond of these technologies again. I guess the reason I discourage them is just the cost to implementing, particularly for small, medium enterprise, is generally unrealistic. I find with large organizations, they generally can, well, they sometimes can have the option to start to bring in these systems, and things like augmented realities I'm incredibly fond of for the larger companies. Yep. And third and finally is big data and machine learning. You can't do machine learning without big data. Yep. So the way that machine learning algorithms work is that they use data, historical data, to inform future decision making. In other words, they can produce forecasts based on previous information. Yeah? Is everyone familiar with the Volvo campaign that was released as a bit of a joke that used AI to create an advertising campaign? Is anyone familiar with that one? So effectively what happened was they used machine learning on people's interaction with previous campaigns that Volvo had released and used this to create effectively this script for for a video campaign that was then released as a bit of a stitch up. And the learning from that was that we can't use historical data to inform creativity, right? But we can use historical data to inform future projections. Yeah. Generally, again, as I said, with machine learning, you need to be a large organization because you need access to big data. Big data generally, I know we all kind of think that we're collecting huge amounts of data over time. Big data generally means billions plus entries of data in a system. Yeah? You need a tremendously large number of data points to be able to use machine learning to understand what people's behavior is going to be. Does that make sense? Yeah? So a bit of a summary. I'm not anti-emerging technologies. As I said, I do a lot of talks on these sorts of things. I just think you need to be really realistic about, are these right for you? The last thing I'm going to say is the approach to emerging technologies should not be, I want to use, and I've heard this a lot, and you probably have too, I want to use emerging technologies so that I can get a market advantage over my competitors. It's not the right approach to have. The mistake that puts you in is that you're trying to mesh some sort of new product or new offering around a technology as opposed to thinking about what your customers want. So start with what your customers want. Sometimes these systems do bridge that gap. I've seen it a lot of the time in the case of VR and AR. So lessons learned, just to do a bit of a wrap up. As I said, the main focus for today was really around the approach. And during the Q&A, which we're going to run through shortly for about 15 minutes, I think we have. Yeah. I'm really eager for people to share their personal horror stories. If you don't want to share your company or you don't want to share the particulars, I'm happy to work with what we've got. My main intent here is to make sure that you have an approach that you can start utilizing these systems. Yeah. I know that you all know which CRMs you're using and which CRMs you want to be using, or that you want to be using workflow automation tools like Zapier. The reality is that the approach is I know that you guys know the tools. These systems are out there, and if you need a long list or a shopping list of systems for various different functions, come see me at the end. As I said, I'm across the hall, and I'm happy to provide that to you. But the approach is always something that I find is incredibly challenging. Second thing we went through was some of those systems, in particular analytics and workflow automation. And then we went through a bit of emerging technologies. And again, happy for you to ask questions if there is an emerging technology you want to implement. I do think there are use cases where it makes sense. Add me on LinkedIn. Feel free to shoot me an email or text me on a Sunday night at 2 a.m. I love it. But yeah, they're my details, and I think we'll get started with the Q&A.
We've got a couple of boxes, so who's ready to have some questions for Lambros? He wants to see this in action. He's already told you he loves these toys, yeah?
Oh yeah, no, I want to see that thrown around.
Okay, down the back there. First question.
Yep. Okay. My name's Tiffany. I work for a global company, but we have quite a bit of flexibility at a local level. I suppose one of the barriers that I find is data. It's taking your data out of the CRM system and then using it through MailChimp, etc. And it's the management of that data that seems to be a little bit of a stumbling block for us, because I understand the importance of having relative content, but if people are opting out, then you've got to manage that, and it just becomes a little of a beast trying to manage it from one platform to another. So I'm finding that's a little bit of a stumbling block. Any recommendations for that?
So we're assuming that like the systems that you want to use are not the limitation, as in like you can adopt whatever
Correct.
you want?
That's yes, and I can.
And what's
correct.
your CRM?
It's Pronto.
Okay. Okay, and you're using MailChimp, did you say, for email?
Correct, using MailChimp. So it's the management, and we have quite a range of markets. So we have different customer lists for the different respective markets, target audiences. So it's the management of that, and we want to target these customers on different aspects of our business as well. So sometimes it's about product introduction versus just standard business communication that we need to provide them, like privacy notifications, etc.
Yeah.
So it's the management of that data from one platform to the other. Any advice on that?
Once you get it to MailChimp, is it in a state that you want it to be in? As in, like, once you've gone through that really cumbersome process of getting the data across, is it quite... Does MailChimp do what it needs to?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Yeah?
It does.
So it's mostly the migration process.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think definitely start with a tool like Zapier. I think check that out. Have you used it before?
No.
So I'd give that a go. Integrate it with both systems, and you can set up the different triggers as we spoke about. So you can have when a user is added to your CRM, you can have when a user changes their settings so that you can update if they need to be removed from the MailChimp list because they've unsubscribed. You can do that as well. You also can set up reverse triggers. So sometimes what I find is that if you're doing email marketing through MailChimp and a user unsubscribes, you need the information back in your CRM to update as well. So you can set up the reverse trigger as well if you need to.
Okay, great.
That's what I'd be doing.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Hello, I'm Nicole. I just wondered if you had some case studies or examples of people who you feel have done this really well or are doing this really well, just to share.
In terms of implementation of automation? Yeah. Larger organizations, I think Qantas has done a really good job of it. Do we have anyone from Qantas in the room? No? All right. Yeah, so I think Qantas has invested a tremendous amount into automation. I don't think that's a secret to anyone. I won't speak to the particulars because we've done work with them. But they've invested a tremendous amount into automation. Tools like Zapier for an organization of that size generally don't work. You do need to be realistic about what the organizational size is and how complex all the data systems are. When you think about a company like that, you've got to think about the age of the business, the age of the data, and the fact that, yeah, you may have systems you may have data in a modern CRM, but they've also got data that they need to tap into that's in much older systems. It's kind of like the Telstra problem, right, of upgrading systems and the cost of doing that versus the cost of just supporting old technology. But in terms of case studies of companies that have done it incredibly well, I've been very fond of Qantas's work there. They have needed to go down the path of a lot of custom work with companies like MuleSoft. So Qantas and MuleSoft have a very close relationship so that they can implement those sorts of tools. I will also call out that Qantas is probably the only company we've worked with who I know uses MuleSoft.
Sorry, it's Dominique here. In regards to then with an automation, do you recommend that you bring the actual resources to do it in-house or utilise agencies externally?
To implement the automation?
Yeah, and ongoing.
Yeah, ongoing.
Yeah.
I think the nature of automation is that realistically, if you've done it right, you shouldn't need to do it ongoing, right? Like the whole premise is that those systems, once they're installed, should be automating a process, and therefore by design you've failed if you need to do work ongoing. So generally I'd say, because it is something that is a smaller in the grand scheme of things, as in it's not an ongoing thing that's going to need to take, you won't replace one system and that system takes 2 years to replace. So generally, you would have, say, a consultant come in, or you'd have an individual within the organisation, like a performance manager or operations manager, who would wear the hat and take full lead on these sorts of things. If it's someone internal, generally I say they sit across more departments than just marketing. It's strange to have a marketing automation specialist who works within the company. But generally you can have people in, say, performance management or operations who sit across automation across multiple different divisions or all divisions in the organisation, and they will kind of cherry pick different departments and work with those departments to automate processes. Those, though, are companies that generally take automation very seriously. So using Qantas again as the example, that would be the sort of organisation where that structure would make sense. For companies that aren't maybe that kind of size, or it doesn't make sense to have someone who's responsible for automation, or they haven't started doing automation properly yet, and so they're not ready to employ someone full-time or make it someone's full responsibility to do this, then generally I'd say, yeah, consultant, or someone who can come in and do it as a one-off, and potentially even like with smaller organisations, which I don't think you are, but for the small organisations in the room, generally you can get consultants in who teach you how to do this process so you can install automation tools across the business yourself. So that's an option, and it may work for your organisation's size. I just need to know more. But generally I'd start with, yeah, one-off if it is a first attempt at it.
Hi, I'm Angela. I'm from New Zealand.
You were very visual with it. It was great. She always put her hand up.
I've got my colours right too. My question is, what technology would you be using to monitor and track behavioural activity?
To track, behaviour?
Behavioural.
What sort of behaviour are you looking to track?
What people are actually doing and how they're engaging with your website or across social platforms.
Across social? So
but also mainly on your website.
Yeah, so I think if it came to, like, my general really easy systems to kind of set up that I would do for a business to get information on what's happening across those kind of tools, so thinking like social plus website, maybe you've got a mobile app as well. I generally go down the path of Google Analytics across the mobile app and the web. I'd go Hotjar on the web for sure. And then what I'd do is I'd get a system like Google Data Studio. There are others out there like Tableau that some of you may have used, but a data visualization tool that can sit across all those systems, because it can tap into things like Facebook, but like Facebook's data feeds, but it can also tap into Hotjar, it can tap into Google Analytics, obviously. And what I would do is I'd then start to draw joins on the data sets. And what that means is you need to think about how you can link data so that if someone is on the website, how do we know that they came from this Facebook campaign? So the challenge there is generally not so much setting up those systems, but it's more so about setting up, it's more so about making sure that you're linking data across tools. Because as we know, when someone bounces from a Facebook ad or a Facebook campaign through to a website, that transition is sometimes where the system, the data visualization system and the reporting systems will fail. And that's where if you put the right processes in place, and it's things like unique landing pages, URL parameters, all those sorts of things, where you can make sure that the person who's landed on the website has come from that source or that campaign, and then Google Data Studio would be what extracts that. Analytics can do a lot of it, by the way.
So is that Data Studio like a dashboard?
Say again, sorry?
Sorry, the Google Studio, is that like a dashboard pulling all of that?
It's a dashboarding tool, yeah, but it can sit across multiple different systems. So I think where you may struggle a little bit, I mean, I'd need to look more into it, but I think where you struggle a little bit is on the Facebook side of things, because I think the information Facebook gives you is maybe not as intricate as a lot of people want from like a behavioral analysis point of view. It's like Hotjar's really good with behavior analysis because you can see how someone interacts with a page. But seeing how someone interacts with your posts, if they're not interacting with it by liking or commenting or sharing, beyond those metrics and views, of course, it's hard to build a profile around your user base on Facebook. And that's generally where we need to rely on these other systems. I think, yeah.
Hi, I'm Adam. Just a quick question for you. When you talk about AI and machine learning, is that the same thing in your view?
So machine learning is just a class of artificial intelligence.
What's that?
Machine learning is a subclass of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence or AI is the technology class, and then machine learning is a subclass within AI. And then you've got chatbots are a subclass of machine learning. Augmented reality is also a subclass. They're all parts of machine learning. The other types of AI are highly theoretical still and haven't come into practice, which is why people use AI and ML as terminologies very interchangeably. But the reality is that ML, AI, they use interchangeably because most people are just doing ML because it's the only type of AI there's one other type that no one talks about that's been commercialized, but in like defense. But yeah, machine learning is, I guess the main,
One more over here.
I think we had one here. Yeah. Hi.
My name is Kitty. We are quite similar to the first question you answered. We are a global company actually, but locally we are quite small, like 50 people in Australia, spread in 3 offices, actually 3 locations. So our problem is, first question is a little bit similar because our CRM system is global. It's using Microsoft Dynamics, which is not going to change at all.
It's a good system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And locally we are using MailChimp to do all the campaign, but the customer data migration between these two basically is manually. So every time we enter new leads, new customer information, we have to migrate manually from CRM to our campaign system, audience. The most part is once this customer is no longer exist or something people change. Basically, you don't know at all. So we're asking if do you know any tools can help us to do these kind of things?
I mean, if the circumstances are similar in that you are struggling to get information from one system to another, and bringing a new automation tool into the business is not going to be a struggle, then I'd make the exact same recommendation of Zapier, or Flow was the other tool I recommended during the slides. Zapier, I think, has native integrations with Dynamics as well, so you shouldn't have an issue there. And then, obviously MailChimp wouldn't have an issue. Again, I just make the same recommendation, make sure you do the reverse integration as well. It's a mistake a lot of people make.
Actually, I have second questions.
Yeah, go.
I'm not sure it's fitting your automation or not. We also do like content searching, and currently we are using Mailwater to do all these kind of while searching keywords, find all the relevant industry news for us, so we can continue to do content marketing or something relevant. We need to find the hotspots and what's happening in this industry.
So like finding trending content.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sure.
But once you really want to find trends, the keywords is really important. And it's very hard to find correct keywords, actually. If it's too broad, you get a lot of irrelevant information. If it's really narrowed down to your very narrow, especially like business industry, you don't have any news you can find. Do you have any tool or any recommendation you can do find this one?
I think my team generally uses Google for this.
Google?
Yeah, Google's pretty good. It's like Google Trends.
Google Trends.
Google Trends, Google Alerts, I think is what their system's called that we use. I'd go Google Alerts. I personally use Sem Rush for finding keywords because I find that you can actually set up alerts based on news stories that go live. So I know a lot of people use Google Alerts because it's free and it's great and you can set up alerts on keywords. I personally, like with my own, like we're a small business, so what we do versus clients is different setup. Sem Rush is something that we use, and it's just because it was very easy for us to set up Sem Rush. It pretty much is the same structure as Google Alerts in that what you do is you put in a series of keywords that you want to get alerts on, and then what you'll do is you'll get an email on an interval or a frequency that you predefine, and that'll give you effectively every story or new web page that has emerged that has where that keyword has been tagged.
When you say keywords, like you set up like a few words list, combined list.
I put together a combined list, and generally it makes, so the reason I like Sem Rush is they make suggestions as well on similar keywords that you should be looking at that you may not have thought of. And I think that's probably the bridge between Google Alerts and Sem Rush.
Okay, so sorry for the questions. When you use Google Alerts, you search the web page. So do they also search like a LinkedIn post or like Twitter post? Also search.
Yeah. So the whole mentality of Google Alerts is effectively you put in these keywords, and so you could put in like keyword A, keyword B, keyword C, and you set up the alerts that you want to get, and you'll get an email on those intervals that covers every web page that Google has crawled that has emerged since the last alert that covers that keyword.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
The only major bridge between that and another tool like Sem Rush is that I'm just quite fond of the suggestions it makes around what other keywords you should be thinking of that you may not have implemented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There are a lot of others out there, though. There's no shortage.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Is it a quick one?
Just a quick one. Yeah. Okay.
Go.
So I'm involved in a next innovation course in my uni, and we were looking towards the health aspect of Australia. So we came across blockchain. Maybe blockchain can totally, change the health industry in Australia, but then it has got privacy issues and stuff like that. So how you get into blockchain, and figure out the complications involved in it. So
like how to just get into blockchain?
Yeah. Because it has got so many complications, but at the same time, it's very effective as well.
It's effective for a particular purpose. It's also very flawed in a lot of other respects. Yeah, with health data, generally the issue with the blockchain is that the information is decentralized, which means that you don't control it anymore.
That's right.
We can talk more offline, but afterwards. But you can generally do a mix of blockchain and non-blockchain. So you store some information, the public information, on what's called on the chain, and then the other information, the private data, in your private database, like you would with any other marketing system. And the whole mentality is that if you balance it between both, then you can.
Can we do that?
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll chat more after though.
Maybe you can take this conversation to lunch because we're just about to go. Lambros are going to be away all day, but please thank him for a fantastic presentation. CEO of Station 5, Lambros Photios. Thanks, mate. Cheers, buddy. Thank you. Okay, some good interaction there, and that's what we like. We want more of that this afternoon as well. We get that catch box working itself crazy during the day. Okay, we're going to break for lunch. We've got Texpo out there, so I urge you all to go and have a conversation. say hi to the guys that are exhibiting, learn about what they're doing. The actor Liam Neeson once said, you meet people and you find something that you don't know. They know something you don't know. I think that's what he said. I should get it right, otherwise he'll come in and he's got a special set of skills and he'll probably hunt me down if I don't get it right. So meet some people, learn some more stuff, have a fantastic lunch. We'll be back here just before 1 p.m. to kick off with conversational marketing, followed by video marketing, and then conversion rate optimization. A lot to do. Enjoy your lunch. See you soon.